seems that Blizzard thinks that the competitive casuals podcast is just too overpowered because they keep nerfing us every single week.
Yeah, so they seem to be going hard with the nerfs. The recent press one was huge.
Yeah. Luckily, the ones to Fury that keeps coming are at least small, but they add up after a while.
Yeah, it's very hard to know what to say as well, because it is extremely reasonable to nerf press. Like, it's been a long time coming, and you need it to get nerfed, but it feels super bad when it's such a big swing. They basically nerf you by 20%, like straight off.
Yeah.
And it's hard to talk about because I want to discuss the effects of it without sounding like I'm salty that I'm being nerfed, because I really don't. It doesn't really bother me when it's so reasonable.
Yeah.
But the effect on the entire healing roster in the raid is going to be big. I think we can talk a bit about it, because Press obviously being such a strong healer, and you even playing 2 for most of the fights, getting gutted will affect the progress bosses a lot. I mean, 3 healing of an X is going to be dead, most likely. Not that it's needed now, when it's nerfed. And then I'm guessing Queen Anne's rack is the biggest question mark right now, because Press wasn't really that great on court either way. But they raised the world first double Press doing all the healing on Anne's rack. I don't know how you're gonna solve. It feels like they have to nerf the boss now, since they're not buffing the other healers.
Yeah, so I mean, if we can take a step back and just we don't have to maybe go into the detail of what the nerf is actually doing, but how much would you say, how many sort of percent of a nerf, or how big of a nerf is this that's coming now?
It's up to 20%.
Okay.
So basically they're nerfing one of the hero talents, the core of the hero, the Flame Shaper tree that you're playing, which is about half of your healing, and that's getting nerfed by 50%, and getting some sort of minor compensation, but effectively you're going to lose up to 20% of your overall throughput. And it is quite big. A lot of people like to talk about overhealing. And overhealing is actually quite difficult to fully understand, because there's so many things that goes into it, like pets and unnecessary healing and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're basically just going to end up in a spot where Flame Shaper is not the auto pick, as it's been now. Like, there's no situation where you can make the other hero talent work, since this one is so strong. And then Press is probably still going to be quite good on the fights where the hero talent, the 30-second to 1.5 minute timer, lines up. But when it doesn't line up for like half the fights, I think it's not going to be a top healer. Probably not even close, I would say. I can't really articulate what I'm thinking, but basically you end up in a weird position where if your heals do a lot, you can rely on those cooldowns, and you can get a lot of the healings, or a lot of the healing. But with the recent bug fixes now they did, which was like a 5 to 8% nerf or something, I could already feel the nerf, just because when I didn't crit, I couldn't top the raid by myself anymore, which wasn't a problem, but it was a significant difference. So now adding 20% on top of that you're gonna feel the difference for sure.
Okay, but so I want to take a slight detour here. I want to get back to how this is going to play out with the raid, and how the difficulty curve of the raid, and how everything is going to sort of look now with the nerf to Press. But what I wanted to just say first here, or think about first, is sort of how we ended up here, because you said that you're not going to be swapping your hero talent, right?
You might for some bosses, but you weren't now. Like, there was no situation where you would play the other hero talent.
Okay. Because the thing is that or wasn't it in the start of the raid that wasn't there a point at the start of the raid where it wasn't clear which you were going to end up playing as Press?
Yeah, it must have been some community misperception, because everyone was talking about Chrono Warden, the other hero talent. And I thought you were going to play Chrono Warden as well. Most of the people played Chrono Warden on the Heroic Week release. like the Raise the Wall first guilds also played them. Everyone played Chrono Warden for the first day, and then the second day everyone played Flame Shaper. And I'm not sure where the misinformation or the misjudgment came from, but I think there were a lot of bug fixes that I don't know exactly what they were, but there were some interactions with Flame Shaper, the really broken hero talent, that got a lot of attention and bug fixes and whatnot in the PTR. So I think people assumed it got nerfed into the ground, or some interaction that was important wasn't as broken anymore. But yeah, it was still really, really, really good.
Okay, because I mean, it's obviously, given how unbelievably strong preservation has been, it feels weird that there was like a discussion, or it wasn't even clear, like in the start. Like, wait, that seems crazy. Like, I can't imagine that would have happened for like a DPS spec, that it would have been that off, right? The perception would have been so wrong.
Then it would have been seemed like something would have had to be incredibly incorrect in the sim, which I think is very, very likely in the healing sims, since there's not as much attention to it, and yeah, simming healing isn't as clear as DPS, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think press is going to be bad or unplayable or whatever, but it has a much larger effect than just nerfing press by itself, right? Because you're nerfing the best healer that you're usually stacking in the raid by a significant amount, and they haven't directly touched the two last bosses as a reaction to this. And I think I'm mainly worried about people being committed to press, like I'm going to continue playing press, and I'm not sure how you're going to make the difficult fights work now that they have been sort of... It didn't look like 4 healing Ansrac with double press was free.
Yeah.
So nerfing presence, slightly nerfing Holy Paladins, it seems like... I don't know how you're going to do it. I'm guessing they have to nerf the boss.
Yeah, because when the numbers are this large, and I mean, so if we look at like the world first kill, like the percentage of the healing that came from the preservation evokers in that 4 healing setup, it must have been like 70 or 80%, right? Only from those 2 people.
Yeah.
So I mean, the 20% nerf to that's a significant nerf to your overall healing. Like, since already like that much of your healing, it's getting nerfed by that, right? But so the interesting question is just, of course, will that solve itself? Because there's going to be more gear, and there's going to be more this like buff that, again, I'm still not sure when that is happening, but it has to come like this week or something, I think, if I'm not misremembering what they said. And I don't know how strong that buff is in and of itself, but that might just like sort of make it so that you don't really need as much healing anymore. Like the combination of getting gear and getting that buff.
I think a fight like Cuvesa is a fight where gear will help a lot, right? Like just not dying from the mechanics and being overall healthier. You'll do some more throughput with gear as well. But I'm not even leaning either way. I have no clue how it's going to affect Queen Ansrac, since I haven't played it. I haven't felt where the difficulty is. Like, it's sometimes hard to look at and feel what's going to be difficult with the healing. Even Cuvesa surprised me, where it doesn't really feel hard on the healing. You know, you just need to sort of... I mean, I've only played the nerfed version of the fight, but you would assume that it's really difficult to get the people up that has the dot or healing in the intermission or whatever, but it's much more just not dropping to 10% at any point.
Yeah. I mean, I think so what I heard from the healers in my guild was that it was like a really, really crazy healing fight pre-nerf, and I think obviously, as we discussed last week, like the nerfs were massive.
Yeah.
So it could very well be that just because they did the nerfs, it wasn't that crazy to heal, but it might have been that if they didn't nerf it, that it would have been extremely, extremely hard to, or even impossible to do it with the press nerfs coming in. But yeah, now I don't feel like it's going to be much of a problem, given we're going to talk a little bit, I guess, about how much the nerfs actually did. But yeah, I think mostly any of these type of worries are probably only really gonna matter for Queen Ansrac at this point.
Well, don't you think it's... I mean, you have a perspective of not being in the healer community, I guess.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of dooming in the healing community as well about Holy Paladin nerfs, press nerfs, raid, yeah, the general sentiment. And I think I mainly agree and is worried about how the later fights that aren't tuned yet is gonna work. But it has a really big domino effect that I don't know that non-healers think about, because if you take 2 Preservation Evokers on a fight like Ansorak, one of the benefits of playing 2 of a strong healer is that they can cover for each other, right? Like a lot of the times you end up with 2 Disc Priests, 2 Holy Paladins, 2 Preservation Walkers, and sometimes that's due to damage. But a lot of the times when you have the best healer in the game, and you can have 2 of them so you can desync their cooldowns, you sort of cover the entire fight, right?
Yeah.
And what Preservation being weaker now, maybe one of the Preservation Evoker's ramps aren't covered anymore, and then there's no other option in the raid. Like, let's say you used Stasis for a particular part in a fight, you used to have big healing cooldown, you could cover it. And the next best option might not be another healing cooldown, it might be 2 healing cooldowns. But you probably can't afford to use 2 healing cooldowns there because they're already assigned somewhere else, right? So this big a nerf can really shift how you're gonna have to plan the fight, and maybe it just ends up with the fight having to be nerfed, or you sort of have to play 5 healers, or a completely different setup with like disc. Not that disc's broken, but maybe you need the disc cooldown to cover the spots the Preservation previously did.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be. It's interesting to play out, but it's so hard to speculate when we have we still have so much gear to get, and we still have so much, the other stacking buff as well. So it's so hard to sort of see how that's gonna end up playing out, how much easier that's gonna make it or not make it. But also, I mean, at least for my guild, we never were intending on running 2 press, right? We don't have 2 press evokers. So for us, I guess this has to be really good, right? Because I'm assuming otherwise we would have had to almost get the 2nd press, at least for Queen Ansorak. Maybe even earlier.
You probably would have benefited earlier, but yeah, I'm not sure. Gear has a really big effect, as you say, and just because the Raise the World First guilds had to do 2 press on the last boss, maybe you wouldn't. It might be rough to do 0 if they're that broken, but the second one isn't usually as big as the first one. Most of the time you have, like, it becomes. I've always had this gripe. It's a bit of a sidetrack, but in our old guild, I play disc most of the time, right?
Yeah.
And then some tiers you needed 2 discs. And then you're in the weird position where, do I assign the second disc, who's either off-spec, like a DPS player playing disc, or it's another healer not super familiar with disc? Do you give that person the traditional timers, which are easier but more important? Or do you give them the second disc timers, which are most often clunkier and harder to do, but not as important?
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Yeah, that's like a dilemma.
And we've had this tier as well, because we were just lucky that our 5th healer, our DPS player, plays Evoker, so we had a 2nd press quite naturally. And we played him on, I think Ovenax was the only fight where we benched a healer to play press.
Yeah.
And it's happened there as well, where this time I took the traditional healer, the traditional timers, like the better timers. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a bit of a sidetrack, but
yeah, no, but I mean, that was actually, I don't know if you listened to the Podyssey this week, but that was actually pretty much their Patreon question this week. Was it wasn't specifically about healer, but it was specifically about it was very similar, like in the same vein. It was like, if you in like a non-raised word for guild, you often end up with a situation like someone's away now and we need to slot someone else in. And if the person you're slotting out was doing some specific mechanics or whatever, was assigned to something on the fight, would you slot the person in to do that, or would you slot someone else who had already played the fight to that and then do like a double swap instead, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Which is kind of same thing, but not specific to healing, more specific to like just doing something on the fight and then just taking in someone who's less experienced or less good or whatever it might be.
But, it's always a dilemma.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's easier for the race to work first. It's not like someone's like be like, I can't be there. You know, they're all they're all gonna show up for the raid, right?
Yeah, and they're gonna do the most effective thing, not really worried about experience or anything. And it's not even a flame, it's just one person having played a spec a lot more, or a person having played a fight for 100 pulls more is a big difference, even if people are actually gamers.
Yeah, exactly.
So
but
yeah, you go.
okay. No, I was just gonna say maybe we should just give some heads up here that this week's podcast. Usually we try to record this on Mondays or Tuesdays, sort of after our raid weeks have concluded. But because I'm going away all of the coming week with work, we have to record now on the Sunday afternoon. So we're in a slightly different point in the week, and by the time you hear this, if you're listening, then there will have gone quite a few days since we release on Wednesdays. So, and some of our things here might become outdated by that time. We will see about that. And now my girlfriend is making a bunch of sound in the background as well. But yeah, so we'll see. We'll pull up some sort of numbers about the nerfs and everything. But maybe good to take everything sort of with a grain of salt. And that also that I guess that my guild has only raided once since the last episode, since the reset. We raided on Wednesday. Since we are now down to doing 3 days a week, since we're out of the first 2 mythic weeks. And your guild has raided twice, Wednesday and Thursday. And we each have 2 raids left then this week, which is today and tomorrow. But that won't be included in here. So mostly anything about our performance ending of this week will also just be speculation, you could say.
You want to pivot from the healing talk and go over your raid and my guild's 2 raids?
Yeah, I think we can maybe talk about... yeah, can maybe sort of talk mostly about the nerfs, I guess, and then also how the bosses sort of feel now. So yeah, I guess you can maybe go first. Like so, ending of last week, your guild just almost killed Broodtwister, but not quite. And now
we choked a bit on Brood. We had her at 3%, a couple of pulls, and then this Wednesday when Overnex was nerfed, we went in and literally one-shot it, and it was a really messy kill as well because we had like 2 melee deaths in the first minute, so we could rest one and then wait for the second rest for the other one.
Yeah.
And then we just played the fight out, and it died. I can't remember exactly when it died, but it died way before you'd lose space in the room.
Yeah.
And then that was about it. So on our reclear, we literally one-shot the first 5 bosses, including the first kill on Overnax.
Yeah.
And then then we went and did some heroic splits, the last 3 bosses, I think. And then on Thursday we started progressing Kuvesa. We might have pulled her a bit on Wednesday as well, but we basically on one night we got her down to 10% with the sort of new 2 heal 5 tank strat. And hopefully we're gonna kill her tonight on our 3rd raid.
Did you see the enrage of the fight, or did you just die before?
Yeah, I think we played to the enrage like 2 times. I don't think either of the attempts were really that close, you know? Like, even the 10% pull, we probably... I can't remember exactly, but we probably had like 5 people dead after the second intermission or something. Or at least before the last intermission, so... Didn't really feel close whatsoever. We saw their rage a couple of times. Once or twice, I think we saw it with just the tanks alive, right?
Yeah.
So overall messy. From the perspective of not having played the fight before, it's still... I think I might be in a minority camp here where I feel like the boss seemed to be hard enough for where it's at. Because it might be... It's gonna be rather quick to kill the fight, but it is a really quick fight. You can wipe pretty early and go again. So the pull numbers can be a bit inflated, right? Depending on if you call wipe with 2 deaths or not.
Yeah.
but all in all felt kind of challenging enough for a sort of 100 pull boss, in my opinion, because it's not satisfying to wipe and go again, because all of the wipes are just people individually dying. Like, you can't really wipe the raid in the same sense as like other bosses such as Tindral, but you indirectly wipe the raid. If 2 DPS dies in the first minute, you won't kill the boss, if you 5 heal at least.
Yeah.
So I don't know. How was your week? Or the start
Yeah.
of the reset?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, we didn't go into Mythic right away on the Wednesday. We did some sort of heroic and normal splits. We didn't do the full splits or anything. We just did a few bosses in each with some sort of what's it called, some lockouts that were saved. And then we also went in and cleared the bosses. I think we also one shot the first 4 bosses, and then I think we wiped once or twice or something on Broodtwister, but yeah, we killed it as well. Or maybe something like that. And then so again, just like before, I'm not in on Kaivessa, so I didn't play myself, but I was watching my guild play it, and they I don't know how long they had, like an hour or something maybe, and they got the boss to like 25%, I think, so it wasn't much of progress, I guess, from last time. I think there was like 33% pre-nerf last week. So I guess, and then we didn't obviously raid Thursday, as I mentioned. So we're gonna have our second raid today, and I'm hoping that it's dying today, but I don't know. There was also, I think, difference between our guilds there as well, is that my guild did not, which I'm not sure why, but we didn't Vantus on Nexus-Princess actually.
Yeah, I know you said that, and that seems so strange to me. Even though it's getting nerfed, it feels like, from the outside, it looks like Kivesa is very much a numbers boss, even in early progression. And it feels like Court is not really a numbers boss in any point in the progression. Even the Raise the World First guild said they killed it like significantly longer before they needed to, right?
Yeah.
So I was a bit curious about that decision, if you have any insight on it, because that seems like a blunder, even if you've sort of progressed the fight already and feel like you could kill it with a nerf.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's a bit hard to say since we haven't. I mean, of course, if they go in and one-shot it today, it's gonna maybe look like a really smart move or something. But unless, like, if it starts taking up time today, I don't really know why. It doesn't really make sense to me, given that, especially when we're down to raiding the 3 days, right? Because there's really no world where we kill Court this week, I think. So it doesn't seem to help that much. So I don't know, actually.
So to take it to an extreme example, wouldn't you rather have a couple of pulls more on Court without Vantus than
I mean,
having Vantus, but
that's what
a few less pulls?
That's what I'm thinking. But of course, now if my guild kills Court on Monday, it's gonna look like the biggest genius move of all time. But it doesn't seem likely.
Well, not even kill on Monday, or you need to. Oh yeah, kill Court on Monday.
Kill Court. That's what I'm saying. Like, if they kill Court on Monday, then it's gonna look like a fucking genius move. But again, that seems highly unlikely.
That'd be surprising.
That would be very surprising. Yeah, extremely surprising.
But how many pulls did you guys do on Kivessa on Wednesday?
Ooh, I don't know off the top. I can look that up, but I just know that we had.
But did you do an hour or?
I think something like an hour, but I'll pull it up on the side right now. But I just know that pre-nerf we did 84 pulls on the last week.
Okay.
And then let's see. So this week we did 17 pulls.
Did you get any? What was the sentiment in the raid, having played the fight quite a bit, unnerfed and now nerfed?
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I think if you looking over our wipes, most of them were just. I think one thing also that should be said is probably that they immediately call wipe if people die, if that makes sense. Almost all of our, or more than half, I think, of them were just P1. Like almost everything was just like they died at the start or whatever you want to call it. Like, because as soon as 2 people are dead or whatever, that you can't immediately rest everyone, they just call wipe, I think.
But that makes sense. I think we're gonna do that today, if I understood correctly, where like when you start progressing the fight, it does make sense to just play it out, let the people alive see the mechanics, the timings, whatever, get comfy. But then once the boss starts becoming killable, you start intentionally resetting when you've gotten yourself to a position where your boss won't die.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, so because we already saw Enrage last week, right? Pre-nerf. So I mean, there's technically nothing new that can happen, right? So in some sense, it could die any pull, right? I guess like if everyone would live to Enrage, it would die, right? So I guess in that sense, that's probably why. But I guess also that also meant that there wasn't that much more. But yeah, it was an hour and 5. So the first pull was 65 minutes from raid being off. So yeah, it was pretty much an hour of pulls that they had on Wednesday on the boss.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll obviously have more information today, but obviously that won't make it into the podcast for any of us. But yeah, that's pretty much it. But I wanted to maybe take a sort of step back and not only focus on our guilds as well, and just sort of also focus on all guilds in the world, right? And just see like how much the nerfs seem to have done, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I pulled up the numbers before we started recording today, and if we start with Broodtwister, since it's the earlier boss, there was actually 65 kills on Broodtwister pre-nerf, which, by the way, I think 65 kills on that boss pre-nerf maybe means that the nerf wasn't really necessary, or at least didn't have to be nearly as big. Because 65 kills, I mean, this is only the second Mythic week, right? So it doesn't seem crazy that, But regardless, now after the nerfs here, the number is at 170. And what should be said then, I guess, is that we're recording this on Sunday afternoon, and most guilds in this sort of range, top 170, I guess, that are affected by this then, or I guess between 65 and 170, whatever you want to call it. Almost none of those guilds would raid on Friday or Saturday, right? Like those aren't common raid times, like for almost any guild. So the reasonable days that people could have raided would have been in EU, it would be Wednesday and Thursday. And in US, I guess Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, potentially 3 raids in the US, but most likely I think guilds in this range wouldn't raid maybe all 3 of those. I would guess maybe they raided 2 of those as well. So I think most of the guilds here probably have raided once or twice, probably leaning more towards twice, I would say. And I don't know, it feels like a lot especially since one of those raids will be a reclear raid, because I don't think anyone's been extending yet, really. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I could have looked up like how far people would have got. Like looking at the guild 170, like had they even pulled overnights before? They probably had.
I would be surprised if many, like maybe there's some, but I don't think the guilds that have killed it now, just like us, went in on Wednesday or Thursday and just killed it in a few pulls. I think the nerf was very warranted, but it's very not the way or to the extent they nerfed it, but you have to realize that every guild was just stuck on Overnax, right? Like there was very few guilds that actually mythic raided and it wasn't at Overnax last reset. And the skill and commitment, the discrepancy in those skills are quite high, right?
Yeah, for sure.
To me, it doesn't seem unreasonable that Overnax had to be nerfed. I think I would have liked to see it nerfed in a way that made it more accessible, like removing the grip necessity sort of and making it a 4 heal fight, and they could have gone a different direction with the same result that would have left the boss in at least a numbers wise better state. But now they decided to make it easy on the numbers but kept the sort of general design of the fight where you need to grip and knock and be coordinated and whatever, and I guess that's fair enough. But didn't we talk about how many guilds had killed Russian on last reset?
Yeah, it's a lot, let's say.
Because I think that's the number to look at more than how many people were at.
It's over 1,100 that have killed it now, at least. So It's still a pretty steep jump from Rashinan to Broodtwister.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely pretty steep. But yeah, I don't know. I think for me, I think the double grip thing definitely would have been a better thing to look at rather than pretty much all of these other nerfs. And
Yeah,
also
I agree.
the visual clarity thing that I have been, complaining about.
But all in all, I mean, we only did one pull, but the fight seemed easy. But I would guess that people still have to progress the eggs and have to play the fight through. And I wouldn't guess the new guilds will kill it before the third pie slice. So I think maybe the boss is in a good state now, but it will feel super bad in 2 months with the buff rolling and gear, and it's just gonna be a shell of itself, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
you could probably out heal the dot as well at some point, right? Like not clearing the egg.
yeah. I think when we killed it now, we had some I don't remember, I think someone had like accidentally unbound their focus kick or some weird shit, and we had one worm just spam casting 2 or 3 casts back to back to back. Nothing happened.
Yeah.
Like nothing happened at all. It is completely gutted fight. I don't know. It seemed
Maybe
weird.
the world rank 1000 sort of approach should be just go in 5 heal and sort of plan for some sort of disaster. And maybe it's doable. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean they still have to solve the eggs. That's the thing, right? But everything else you can out heal effectively. Right? It's only the eggs that you can't really out heal.
I think you will be able to out heal an egg breaking.
You think?
And I don't know exactly how it works. Yeah, well, you get like a 30-second debuff, right? That does a lot of damage. But with more gear, I'm not saying you can out heal it today just by chance, but maybe you can sort of plan to out heal it. I don't know if the debuff stacks. If it doesn't, maybe you can just not break a set of eggs.
Yeah, maybe. I don't. I mean, on heroic you can skip one each time and be just fine. But I don't know on mythic. I guess we'll. Yeah, I guess we'll see if like later down the line maybe that will become like actually a strategy that people do. But that's less AOE pad, so that doesn't sound fun at all. Or wait, no, you get the ads anyway. I guess. So, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But you get them at a
Maybe
weird time
more
window.
AoE pad because you can pull cooldowns for a double set of ads.
Yeah, yeah, kind of. Yeah, that would be super weird. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on if that ends up happening or not.
But
But
I
yeah,
think in comparison to last reset, we both thought that the Oven X nerfs was huge, and I think we still think the same.
yeah,
Like the boss was a lot easier. And I think we both were leaning on Kuvesa getting a big hit as well, and maybe they should have just made it so you can 2-tank it and compensate for that with some marginal, right?
yeah.
Or with some margin. But I feel like I've changed opinion a bit where, to me, the fight seemed reasonable. It seems it's still difficult, even though the numbers are easier. Especially if you're gonna 5 heal, you're gonna have a tighter DPS check. If you 4 heal, you're gonna have a harder time living the fight. It seems like a kind of fair trade-off. And
Yeah,
I guess we'll see how fast it dies today, or even if it does die. But for the way you wipe on the fight, it seems good. I'm gonna wipe 100 times and not 300 by just me or someone else standing in a line in a dagger or something. Like it's not very. It doesn't feel like progress. At least a fight like Tindral really feels like progress.
I mean, maybe, but and obviously I haven't even done one pull myself on it, but just looking at the numbers, I feel like the nerf was unbelievably too large. Because, so just to give the same type of numbers again, right? Going into this reset, there were 11 guilds that had killed Nexus-Princess, and there were 65 guilds that had killed Ovinax. And most of those Ovinax kills, mind you, came very late in the week, because I think we killed it on the Sunday, and that was like world rank 30 or something. So after the Sunday raid, another like 35 guilds or something killed it. So there were very few guilds that had actually pulled Nexus-Princess at all. Like there were very few guilds that had pulled Nexus-Princess to a significant amount, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And now And again, we're talking like 1 or 2 raids into this week now. We have 50 kills on the Nexus-Princess. Which means that almost every single guild, out of the 65 guilds that had killed Ovinax, including those that killed, like, just barely scraped by and killed it on the last day, almost all of those guilds have now already killed Nexus-Princess, and we're like halfway into this week. Including like a full reclear and stuff for everyone.
Yeah.
That feels like you just took away a whole boss from the tier. Like, I saw some people just killed it like from first pulling the boss, it took them less than like an entire raid to kill it, and that's, to me, for the third to last boss in the raid, that is just too easy. I think I'm not super happy with that, and maybe my judgment got a bit tainted because I think that my guild really got the short end of the stick here, where we had this like sort of front-loaded schedule of having 4 raids in the first 2 weeks, being like sort of in a relatively good spot, I think, where we, pre-nerf killed Broodtwister and got like all the way to enrage, pre-nerf Nexus-Princess, sort of got a bunch of pulls into it there, and then now all of that, I'm not going to say that all of it got wiped out, if that makes sense, but I feel like a lot of that sort of just became kind of useless when people could come in and just kill the boss so quickly from nothing. And so now, I mean, us having gone from having, I think when we killed Overnax, we're ranked like 31, I think, and now we're like 70, or it might become even worse, like since we haven't raided yet even again after the reclear. So I don't know. I feel like we got really short end of the stick there. Hopefully that's gonna even out, obviously, on the later bosses. But yeah, I feel like the boss seemed over nerfed. It seemed like too many guilds just killed it. I understand what Blizzard were going for. They wanted to really open up the middle of the sort of second of the middle half of the raid or whatever, but I feel like they just overdid it, and it takes away from the enjoyment. I understand that it's not that many people, but still, like, all of these guilds in the in this range of like whatever world rank 10 up to like 100 or whatever guilds would have killed it otherwise. I feel like for those guilds you took away, could have been like a fun progress boss, and now you just make it into kind of a joke, which I think is kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, we have really contrasting situations in our guilds, because you really got the short end by being a guild that managed to kill Overnax, and in theory you could have progressed Kuvesa without worrying about killing it, versus our guild that came up short but spent a lot of time on it, meaning our Vantus or whatever would have been affected. And we basically ended up on the same spot just because they nerfed the boss, especially since they nerfed the next boss as well, because the progress you guys made on that reset you killed Overnax is largely removed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's going to help a little bit and whatever, it's
Yeah,
the same fight, but it
sure.
definitely, yeah, it definitely wasn't as useful as if we would have just had the nerf already at that point then, or if it wouldn't have come at all.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah.
So I get how it sucks, and I think most people do feel like the Kuvesa got nerfed too hard. But I think it will be more interesting to see at the end of this week, because maybe only the people that did kill Ovinax ends up getting the Kuvesa kill, and some more, because it is a big difference. If we end this week with 80 kills, in my book that's fine. If we end this week with, I don't know, 150 to 200 kills, it's way too easy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's, I mean, maybe like a guild like your guild that, had like 3% or whatever, basically killed Overnax last week. But I think a guild that came into this week and had pre-nerf gotten Overnax to like 30% or something, I think it's a bit weird if they kill Nexus-Princess this week as well, right? That seems just like a lot of progress to do in 1 week.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
think the overall theme, same as we discussed last week, is that the way that they're almost guaranteeing this is gonna be a joke in farm or in later in the season.
Yeah.
Because they just nerf the numbers so aggressively with ever increasing gear and the ICC buff. I think that's the part that surprises me the most, like the way they nerf the fights.
Yeah, I mean, because like you would think that when they are introducing like the ICC style buff, and they also have much, much slower gear progression.
Yeah.
You would think that that would mean that they wouldn't nerf the fights numerically that much.
Yeah.
Because that, you know, they're gonna self nerf in some way, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But now when they're doing both, what's gonna happen? Like, I mean, there are some guilds that like maybe it doesn't matter, you know, for those like world rank 800 guilds or whatever that just that raid 3 days a week and they're just, you know, they're just not that good and they just need it to be easier. But it must feel really bad for like if you imagine like a 2 day guild that is actually kind of good or whatever, and they just get and can only play all these super nerf versions of everything because they don't have the time to get there yet. Or even worse, like those like 1 day guilds that are actually like, oh whatever, we'll raid every Sunday afternoon every week and we just try to do our best, and they actually get to the bosses and they actually have some progress to do. But now for those type of guilds, if they are actually sort of any good, these bosses are just going to be a joke if you come here in like a few weeks with like an ICC buff and a few more resets of gear and everything. So I don't know. I feel like I don't know who it's good for, and I feel like almost the best thing they could have done would have been to make like if they from the start would have made Sikran and Rashanan just much much harder, then they wouldn't almost have had to do this nerfs, right?
Yeah, for sure. Thick Crunch, both of those fights seems very strange to miss the mark because they're so simplistic, right? They're almost patchwork fights as well. Like, do you think they've changed something with how they tune? Because if we look at the War Within so far, I feel like most people are positive about the class design, positive about the raid bosses, but the tuning from classes to raid to keys seems to be all over the place, doesn't it?
Kind of, and but yeah, but I think they also like they like they go so hard. I feel like they should always make micro adjustments, you know. But now they go so hard. Like, I mean, these nerfs we saw now, like they're so. Couldn't they have started a bit slower? I mean, because you can never. It's not true for classes, but for bosses, you can never walk back a nerf. Like if you nerf something, you can never buff it after. That would be very weird, right? So
Yeah,
I don't know why they're so. Maybe
they're so
they was just
aggressive with nerfs,
sorry, what did you say?
so aggressive or so.
Yeah,
they like-
exactly. Yeah. I mean, maybe
Yeah, I
there
don't
was
know.
just such a overwhelmingly bad sentiment from all those like guilds that basically had no business being at Obinax and just
Yeah,
were looking at the prospect of not being able to kill it in months, you know. But I don't know, it just feels like such a heavy-handed nerfs, you know.
it just seems to me that we're sitting here usually complaining about something, but when I think about it, like the expansion seems to be well received, and I like it. I don't have any, like I'm more positive than negative, but everything from classes to raids to keys, which I guess we'll talk about later, just seems to have, like, the tuning is not even close. Like, imagine Sikran. If that was supposed to be a fight, they must have missed by like 15% boss HP or something, right? Like, it's not even.
Yeah. It's super like you can have even week 1 you could have several people dead, right? Like it wouldn't even.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's but yeah, like as you said, like it's weird that they would miss on a boss like Sikran because obviously they had the numbers from Heroic Week. They know how much DPS people are doing. So how can they miss so hard on Sikran?
Yeah.
That seems crazy. Unless their intent was that the first 4 bosses were really really easy, which seems kind of weird to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
I think it's a better bet that Sikran and Rashna were too easy rather than Obenax and Qesa was too hard, because I don't think they were, because if we look at like the Tindral nerfs, for example, like we didn't play pre-nerf Tindral, but having 3 seconds for 17 or 18 people to clear an egg or cyst, whatever it was, that obviously is very hard. But if you look at Ovenax, having 6 seconds or 5 seconds to find your egg is not really comparable. That's the same numbers as the post-nerf version of a Tindral, which is a more difficult mechanic.
Yeah.
So playing Ovenax or Kivessa this week for the first time unnerfed would have been sort of doable. Like, we have a lot more gear now than we started Ovenax. And that could have been achieved by just actually having the first couple of bosses being somewhat difficult. And that will alleviate itself with gear, especially on such simplistic bosses.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I understand that they don't tune the game for, you know, nerds or competitive casuals or whatever you want to call it, but it feels like a little bit like we get caught in the crossfire here, because the nerfs are not for us. The nerfs are for guilds that are much worse than us, but ended up playing the same bosses as us, effectively, right? And then because of that, obviously we are the ones who get, because I'm sure for some guilds that this was lovely, right? It was great that they got these type of nerfs, but for us it's not, doesn't feel great. So I don't know. We'll see how it plays out later down the line, but for now I'm pretty unhappy with the state of these two bosses. I feel like they deleted them a bit.
But still somehow positive about the expansion.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like the expansion overall seems nice, but I feel like the tuning has been a bit wonky. But yeah, there's a very large set of class changes coming in now, at least. So we'll see.
Do you know any of them by heart? Because they announced them a long time ago, and the only thing I remember is Mistweaver hype with the crackling jade lightning thing that I linked you, if you remember.
No, I don't remember. Which one was that?
No, they just made jade crackling, like the sappy ability.
Yeah, I know which one that is, yeah.
Like, it can cleave, and they made it more fundamental, like it actually has a purpose now, I guess. And it doesn't really matter, but that's the only thing I remember from the changes, because it was months ago or at least a month ago, they announced the 10.0 or 11.0.5, right?
Yeah, but okay, so the weird thing is that, yeah, as you're saying, there's in the anniversary patch, as they're calling it, because it will have like the 20th anniversary stuff as part of it as well, but there's also a bunch of tuning. That has been announced for a long time, and they keep adding actually changes to that patch as well.
Okay.
But there's very large class tuning coming in on Wednesday this week, or Tuesday in the US. Like almost every class, almost every spec, even, I would say, at least almost every class has a significant change list this week.
Oh, okay. I thought they were talking about the anniversary patch.
No. So that's the thing. Like, we have, for some weird reason, we have like two sort of sets of changes, and I'm not really sure how they decide what ends up in each. I mean, I understand it for example, Paladin, right? They get like almost like a full rework, I think. I think it affects most of the specs. I know there's very big changes for example, for Protection Paladin. But I don't understand, like, for example, for Warrior, there's just some of the changes are in that patch, and some of them are on Wednesday now. And now we're not talking about, you know, these small, like, yeah, nerfing this by 5%, nerfing, you know, what, like, these are actual, like, changes to how things work. Like, they're tuned, like the change list for Warrior this week, it's like 15 lines of changes of different things. Like, there's a lot of different changes. And so I'm not really sure how they decided how to split this up, but it seems like at least they're doing a lot of tuning now, which is good, I think.
Okay.
But yeah,
is there anything on top of your head that's going to be affecting? I mean, press nerf, obviously.
Yeah.
Is there anything else major I missed? I feel kind of out of the loop on general tuning.
It's a pretty large buff to Shadow Priest. Don't know if it's going to change much. I mean, we already play a Shadow Priest because our raid leader is a Shadow Priest. So it's going to be good for us, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not knowledgeable enough about each of the classes. The one thing I heard, I guess, was that there's a little bit of so basically like the what's it called, Aldrachi Reaver talent for Demon Hunter.
Yeah.
It got buffed a lot for Havoc, and there was some worry, I think, that like even if it would turn out to be better, people don't want it because it plays very weird or something like that.
Okay.
So there was some weird sentiment from Demon Hunter community, I think, that like, oh no, I hope this doesn't mean that we're going to end up playing that. But I don't know how the tuning situation ended up working out after people looked at it. I just heard like the initial gut reaction, I think, from some Demon Hunter player was like, oh no, we don't want to play this hero talent.
Okay.
And then obviously I can only really talk about Warrior, which since I obviously keep more up to date what that means. But effectively, I think they're trying. I think they even said that there's more changes along those lines in the other patch. But they basically want to do two things for Warrior. They want to, well, three things, I guess, actually. They want to make sure that also we don't have this crazy AoE burst that we've been having. Whereas they want to not nerf, at least for Fury, they don't want to Fury to be so weak on single target. So they're trying to buff Fury single target. Unfortunately, though, all the things they've done here, both in this patch and in anniversary patch, they don't really buff the single target. So it's a bit strange. I think the nerf they make to the AoE offset everything to the single target, so they didn't actually end up doing better in single target. And then they want us to not be like hard locked into a specific talent set. Like it's about like basically, if you play like bigger cooldowns every 90 seconds, or if you have active CDR and you just have cooldowns all the time, they want to make those more aligned. And then finally, obviously, which I think is something we can talk about more in general, maybe, which is that they want to encourage people to try other hero talents, which I think is true for more than Warrior. So in the Warrior case, for protection, you only ever play Mountain Thane. For arms, you only play Slayer, and for Fury, you only play Slayer. So they're buffing Mountain Thane for Fury, they're buffing Colossus for arms and Colossus for protection, basically. So maybe that's something we can touch on a bit. I don't know how much insight you have into all different classes, but I feel like, from my understanding at least, like most classes just really, or most specs really only have one that they play, because like, as it usually turns out, someone says like, this is mathematically better, so this is the only thing we play. Do you have any sense of if there's many classes that are actually... Yeah.
Unfortunately, I feel like I'm out of the loop with all of these hero talents. I feel like I have a somewhat of a grasp over the healers, but other than that, I'm quite out of the loop.
Okay, but if you tell me about the healers, do any of the healers ever flex their hero talents, or are they completely static?
Okay, so I think Holy Paladins are quite static. Preservation has been very, very static in Raid, but the other hero talent is the best one in PvP and in M+, which you're also quite good in. So you have that there.
Yeah.
I feel like Disc is in a similar position where it's static in Raid, but it's a different one in static in Raid and M+, but it's different in PvP. Holy Priest sort of the same. Mistweaver, I'm not quite sure. But I feel like at least half of the healers then has a position where the hero talents is static in the type of content you do, but it's not that one is just generally more broken, so you only play that one, but you actually swap to another one in certain content.
Okay. Well, I mean, at least then if you swap in other content, at least you're using it in some way then, which is good.
Yeah, so on my press, I've been playing both of the hero talents, and the broken one in Raid, I've only been playing in Raid.
Right.
I wouldn't ever play that in a 5-man content scenario. So I guess that's balanced in one sense, or like that's one version of balanced where they have specific use cases and they're all being used. All preservation evokers that PvE would have played Chrono Warden in M+.
Okay. Yeah, because I think, I mean, in some sense, it is more important that Blizzard makes sure that the best of each is tuned okay relative to everything else. And then, in some sense, it's okay if the other one isn't great, right? It's good that they're trying to buff them, etc. But the most important thing is obviously the tuning of the best spec, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously, it would make more sense if you were actually switching. So I think looking at like for Fury Warrior, like the difference between like Mountain Thane and Slayer, like before they started making any of these changes now, I think like Mountain Thane was like 30% or some like absurdly large number behind. Like there was no circumstance where you could think that it would be close. Like they couldn't have even tried to make it close. But the weird thing is that they have such different profiles. I don't know how many of the other classes are like having that much of a difference into how the profile works out. But like in the warrior case, like even from the start, there was one specific scenario where you would want to play Mountain Thane, even though it was that much weaker. There was a scenario where you would play it, which would be extremely, extremely sustained AoE. Like if you had like a 4 boss stacked cleave fight that was like long, then you could play it. And now after all the buffs and changes, it looks like actually, I think even already on Wednesday now, I think you're gonna end up playing Mountain Thane in M+, because the sustained AoE is now so much better. And it doesn't take like 10 minutes to actually be better anymore or whatever. It's like you'll actually be better pretty quickly now. So
Do
it
you
looks
have
like
a
you're gonna
preference on?
I don't know. I'm a little bit weirded out about playing Thunderclap as Fury. That's never really been a
Oh,
thing.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the thing is like it doesn't replace Whirlwind, but it gives you the meat cleaver effect. So when you Thunderclap, so it basically becomes, in some sense, it replaces Whirlwind. But I don't know, like, because Mountain Thane for protection feels amazing. Like it feels so good. But that's a bit different maybe because protection is already inclined to use Thunderclap, right? So I don't know. I'm happy to have. I'm happy to be mixing between them. I think both of them are kind of cool. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how it feels now if you actually get to play it. Because I only played it when I leveled up because it's a bit better at like just burst, in leveling content, but not in like any serious content.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like I've. I don't know if you thought about it since you mainly only play warrior, but my perception has been, even from before the expansion was released, that it is quite clear that some of the hero talents are designed, or like one hero talent was initially designed from one spec. Like for all the classes I've leveled, like all the hybrid classes, you really feel that, oh, this one really, like Flame Shaper really works as Preservation Evoker. But what even is this for dev? Like it doesn't even make sense. And the same for several other specs where you just, it seems like they've clearly made it for one and then done their best attempt on making it fit for another, you know?
Yeah.
Does that happen for Warrior with Thunder,
Yeah, I
or
mean, I
whatever it's
think.
called, Mountain Thane and Prot?
Yeah, I mean, Mountain Thane definitely comes from prot, right? Like it buffs and makes like it basically it makes you like you proc like Thunder Blast, which does like insane damage, which just replaces Thunderclap when it procs basically, and you have like a whole lightning thing, whatever. So yeah, it feels super like, yeah, it feels extremely like specific to protection. But the weird thing I think for the warrior case at least is that, yeah, I think Mountain Thane definitely feels like a protection thing. And then it could, in some way, it could have almost been more of Arms, because Arms has already been playing Thunderclap for all of Dragonflight, whereas Fury has never played Thunderclap. But then they had the weird thing where the last talent is like Colossus, which it just sort of goes into more into like Avatar and stuff, and it's like, I don't know. It's just like it doesn't feel like it's super specific to anyone. I feel like that could have literally gone for any of the specs. And then you have Slayer, which is Bladestorm, so that's only obviously Arms or Fury. So I feel like honestly it would have made almost more sense that they switched it so that Fury had Colossus and Arms had Mountain Thane, or if just all three had Colossus or something. I don't know. It just, I feel like Mountain Thane for Fury seems a bit thematically off, but from people having played it more on the beta, and also I played it a little bit, it feels okay. It plays okay, so it's not super weird or anything, but it definitely feels like it comes from protection at least.
Okay. And have you played any other classes than Warrior this expansion?
Nope, I have not. So I have no no take on how it feels to play any of the others actually.
Yeah, I don't think it's a massive difference. It's just, or like I don't think it's very different from class to class. It seems to me that most of the hero talents are good, but most of the hero talents are good, or especially good for one of the specs.
Yeah.
Or feels especially good for one of the specs.
Yeah, but I mean, it makes sense, right? That like how like you would start up with something thematic from the class, and then that would obviously be more in line with one of the specs, probably, right? If that was already the spec that leaned into that type of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, I guess in that sense, I guess Fury maybe is one of the specs in the game that I feel like probably neither of the two things that they play actually came from Fury, if that makes sense. So Mountain Blade definitely didn't come from it, and Slayer maybe not, because you didn't even, for all of Dragonflight, you didn't have Bladestorm even, and now this is the Bladestorm tree, so I don't know, and you didn't have Thunderclap. So the main ability for both of the specs that you play now, you didn't even have in the last expansion, right? So yeah.
Well, if they do that correctly, that could be the best version of it, right? Where like they've made it for arms, but made it fit for Fury, and then you get new abilities or like a newer play style. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, funny enough, I think that Slayer actually works out probably better for Fury than for Arms. Honestly, feels a bit better, I think, the way I've seen, from what I've played so far, at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, that can definitely be a thing.
Do you want to rant about the keys for a bit?
Yeah, I was gonna say we can probably leave the raid and the class tuning for a little bit, and then we can visit it back as well when we've seen everything come into the 0.5 patch as well, and we can actually sort of have all the tuning in place and see how the season is stacking up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want the thing about keys is that there's been a lot of outcry, I think, from the community, again, like Twitter, YouTube, whatever, Twitch, people complaining, and it has to do with basically the difficulty curve of M plus now. So apparently people have said that there are 3 big bumps. The first is going from a 6 to a 7, I think, and then the second is going from a 9 to a 10, and then the last one is going from an 11 to a 12. Obviously, the 6 to 7, I have no idea about. Like, I skipped over all of those keys, only running like 9s and 10s right away for the gear, so I have no idea how that exactly feels, but apparently there's some big jump there because of I guess that's where the 15-second penalty comes in and stuff.
Yeah.
And the 9 to 10, again, I understand that it's there because you get the second of like Tyran and Fortified, so that makes sense. But I haven't felt it as much. But that one I can understand that is a very big jump, but I haven't felt it so much since I've been doing the 10s since week 1 anyway. So it hasn't been something that I've noticed, but I can understand that there's a very big jump there, which doesn't feel good. And then the big one that I've seen more people complain about, and the one that I'm sort of at myself now, because I was going to do my week list this week, and I thought, why don't I just do 11s, just get some extra score or something while I'm doing my week list anyway. So I did pretty much all 11s in time. I think there's 1 or 2 missing because I didn't have to do all keys to get it done this week with my week list. And then that was easy. Like all 11s, super easy. There's nothing. I think if you have even like a remotely coordinated group, like I just joined random groups in the tool, right? You will time all 11s, no problem. But then the 12 keys are a very, very big step up because you obviously get 1 more level of just normal scaling, right? Which would be 10% damage and 10% health. Yep. But you also get this extra affix, which removes the Salatath affix, which honestly is probably, that in and of itself is probably also making it harder because those affixes are pretty easy and they actually give you some form of damage. But I think we can neglect that. I don't think that makes a big difference. But the other thing obviously is that you get this crazy 20% damage and 20% health buff to the mobs. So effectively, if you only look at the key scaling part, it's like going from like, it's almost the same as if you would go 3 key levels in just 1 jump.
That seems just like a miss, doesn't it? Like I understand it needs to become more difficult when they effectively remove noticeable affixes, right? Like active affixes. But it seems strange that the jump from 11 to 12 is a lot more than a traditional 11 to 12. Like it could have been 11 to 13, right? Or something.
Yeah, but like the thing that I don't understand is I don't understand why it would have to be such a big, like, what, like even if that extra 20% thing didn't exist, it's not like that would change anything. It would just be a smoother curve, right? You would do 2 key levels higher in the end, right? But why does that matter, you know? It just makes the progression kind of weird because it becomes super janky, but after that it's all back to exactly the same thing again, right? It's just 10% per level anyway. So it's just the one point that just isolates a lot. And
I think I get the reason for having some sort of additional added, because you wouldn't want to end up in a situation where it would feel easier to do an 11 than a 12. Which, even though if you use the affix correctly, it shouldn't be, I guess it could easily become, like not having to worry about additional affixes, things is scaling more, could in some situation end up feeling easier even though it shouldn't be, right?
yeah, okay. So, oh wait, so you mean like a 12 would be harder than 12 would be easier than 11 because you lost the other affix to deal with? You mean? Is
Yeah,
that what you're saying? Yeah.
I think that's the only situation you have to avoid, where you have, like, it needs to feel like an increase, or it arguably needs to feel like an increase, but it obviously shouldn't feel like a super high increase from the previous one.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm not worried from a like long-term perspective. I feel like obviously now when we're gonna actually start, playing keys for real, like after progress and stuff, you're gonna be past the 12s anyway, right? And it's not gonna
Yeah.
matter. And basically, like once you've cleaned the board and timed all 12s, then none of this matters anymore because now you're just back to the normal sort of scaling. But it's just yeah, I just don't understand, and I feel like there's going to be a lot of players that are going to be caught in this, right? And they're going to be on that level, and they're just not going to be able to break into quote unquote higher keys because the 12 is going to be impossible for them.
Yeah.
So that just seems like a super weird thing. And one thing I saw suggested was because the biggest thing I didn't actually try a bunch of 12s. I just did the 11s. I didn't really play the 12 myself. I think I tried 112 last week or something only. But the thing people say is that most of the thing is just like it just murders your tank.
Yeah.
So something you could do, because the timer isn't much of a concern. So I think you could just have that thing only be a health buff and not the damage buff, for example.
Yeah.
Because that's also exactly how it was on the beta. Even though that was a bug and Blizzard just forgot to put the damage, but that would maybe have made more sense.
Yeah, it's a bit regarding to augmentation, but that's like the only thing I've heard from the M plus community is that the tanks needs help, and with augmentation it puts it in a really interesting perspective, where when it was released it was the best DPSing spec you could have, and then it got nerfed, and then you had it for the group survivability, and then now you need it for the tank survivability specifically, where like that's one of the pivotal reasons you want an augmentation in the comp is just to give the tank the blistering scales.
Yeah, exactly.
But
And I think it depends also a lot on the tank that you play, of course. My own experience this week when tanking, because since I was just joining Pugkeys, it was much easier to join as a tank. Like tanking 11s as a warrior, at least, like it doesn't do anything. Like the mobs barely hurt you, like you don't take any damage. And from what I've heard, it's kind of similar on the higher keys, and I think warrior is the most used tank. It's actually pretty well balanced now, but I think it's on the higher keys. Warrior is the most used tank, which I think is because it's just the most tanky to like just the melee damage from the mobs, which is the bulk of the damage that the tank takes, right?
yeah.
But yeah, I would love to see some form of change there. But yeah, other than that, of course, like it's for the actual key pushers, it's not going to matter, right? Because you're just going to be past 12s and it's not going to be a thing. But it's just a weird arbitrary bump in the road that I don't think needs to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, but people aren't really pushing beyond 12, are they? Like,
I mean, there are some people who are, but yeah.
yeah, but I mean 13 maybe, but is there a 15 key done in the world?
I think last time I looked, at least a 14 was the highest key that anyone had timed. But I can double check that as well. Yeah, exactly. So there's still no higher than a 14 timed, and that's really Arakara and Mists only. Then other keys.
I mean, not that it really matters, but doesn't it feel kind of strange it being so close to what should we do for a weekly? Like just in the score.
Yeah. You get a lot of score though. Like the score is a bit weird now because of they changed a bit how the score works. You actually get a lot of score.
Okay.
It's actually very big. Yeah. So if you do all the 11s, which as I said, like I pretty much did this now just during the yesterday when I did my weeklies, right? Then you have like a little bit over 2.7k score. And if you look at like the overall ranks, like the very highest score people in the world who've done, basically they've done 2 14s then, I guess, and then the rest on 13. They have just under 3.1k, so they have almost 400 score more for those key levels. So it actually scales up pretty quickly anyway.
Okay.
But yeah, it's weird, and I think a lot of people, like, usually what ends up happening is like if you track the 0.1% title cutoff over the season, usually we are always like hundreds of score behind it during progress because you never sort of push any keys. You just do weeklies, and then you just catch up after, and then you push keys, whatever, during farm. But now I'm pretty much, just by doing my 11 weeklies, I'm pretty much at the cutoff, because apparently the bottom of the 0.1% are not good enough to sweep the 12. They're just good enough to do like 112 or something at this point in time.
Yeah.
Which is...
That seems strange.
That seems very strange, yeah. So...
I don't know if it matters though, but it feels very weird that it's not increasing more, that people are actually doing 13s, and 13s are hard, you know?
Yeah, exactly. For like, so every key except Mists and Arakara, no one has done higher than a 13. So I mean, it is pretty crazy.
Have they talked anything about it, Blizzard, about addressing the bump?
No, I haven't seen anything about it. So, but I'm pretty sure that it's gonna be addressed in some way, because this is a big complaint, and I think the same is true for the 9 to 10 jump as well. I think they need to do something about that. I mean, another option would be like for those points where they introduce, so the 10 and then also I guess the 12, they could just do that they introduce this other scaling thing, but maybe the base key scaling doesn't happen on those keys or something. I don't know, just something to make it a little bit more smooth, I think would be really good.
Yeah, I haven't really thought about it. It was his first week. 10s were annoying to time, but very doable. So it was more a game of getting the 10s and then maybe depleting them. And then after the first reset, 10s are just... Like, I'm assuming I'm gonna time a 10.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you don't, but like generally you just spam 10s. And I haven't done a 9 since
week 1, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's pretty much where it's at. Like 10s aren't hard with the current gear level and current knowledge of dungeons. 11s didn't feel hard either, and again, this is just random pugs, I'm just joining myself. And 12s apparently are brutal. So okay. it's a bit weird for sure, but hopefully they're gonna do something about it. But yeah, they haven't said anything. I guess they've been busy tuning the raid and classes, but the thing is just like, if they're gonna do something, they better do it sooner rather than later, right? Because they invalidate a lot of people's progress in the keys otherwise, right? If they take it away after a while.
Yeah.
At least this season, it's easier to catch back up to where you were, if that makes sense, right? Because it's the same every week, right? And there's only 8 dungeons you need to do total, and you're not subject to any special affixes or anything. So,
are you feeling hyped about pushing? Do you like the dungeons? Do you like the... Let's disregard that 12 seems to be hard. Do you think you'll enjoy it now that you've gotten a taste of the season?
I don't know. I feel like, for some reason, I feel like every season I like the returning dungeons more than the new ones. But I don't know. Like I guess my quick rundown is like Arakara. It's okay. I don't mind it. I think it's okay. Mists of Tyrannosaith, I think it's okay. It's a bit boring. Like it's a bit like there's very little routing you can do there, right? It's very flat in that sense. You can't do much, but it's fine. Necrotic Wake, it's fine. Siege of Brawlers, it's fine. Dawnbreaker. I don't love the whole dragon riding thing. I think it's a bit weird. but I guess, and especially since you have to kill those weird lieutenant mobs, so there isn't like that's a dungeon that could have a lot of routing variety, but it doesn't really have it. But I think Dawnbreaker is okay as well. City of Threads, I think, is like one of the all-time worst. Like it's absolutely like there's a huge RP section of the dungeon where you're just running around killing single target mobs, running around trying to find things that are RPing and stealthing and shit. So that you all-time shit dungeon pretty much. Stonevault I actually like. I think Stonevault's my favorite of the new dungeons. It's a bit hard, but I like it. And then Grim Battle, it's also fine. So I think I think honestly all dungeons are fine except City of Threads.
I think I like City of Threads more than Stonevault.
Really? Isn't that just because of difficulty though?
No, I'd say City of Threads seems harder. But that's just because I healed the last boss, I guess. I haven't done it post nerf. I'm not really sure what they nerfed.
Yeah,
but I think I agree in general with your sentiment. I'm also not negative about Siege.
Yes, that's the one I see a lot. Like a lot of people hate on Siege, but I don't get it. I think Siege is one of the like for me, Siege would be like in the top half this week or this season.
Yeah,
I don't mind Siege at all.
Yeah, I feel like the dungeons are good. I think City of Threads is gonna be like the make it or break it if it's gonna feel like the worst of all time. I'm not liking it, I'm not disliking it, I just haven't played it much. I guess we'll see how it ends up. Because there have been some dungeons with annoying, weird RP that have ended up being good in spite of it, you know?
Yeah, I feel like they could just take it away from M+. I don't know. It's just because
I think it has interesting bosses at least. Like the first boss is quite unique. Not that it's super difficult, but it is quite unique. And the second boss is as well. Like a pure 2-target cleave with some combination of mechanics is quite good.
Yeah, but that second boss, if we can quickly stay on that, that is one of the fucking all-time worst bosses for melee. Like those mobs, like they just charge around so much, and as a range, I guess you can just stand in the middle and just shoot at the boss. And as a melee, you're just screwed because it charged away 40 yards, and then 2 seconds later it charge again, and then 2 seconds later they do it again. You're like standing there like a fucking moron, not being able to hit the boss. So that's actually super annoying.
I can see that, but at least it's something different. They don't usually do bosses like that, and it feels like their mechanics, like the mechanics interact with each other. It seems like a cleverly designed boss in comparison to like the 2-target cleave in what's the Onarian Plains dungeon?
Oh, not good. My actual all-time worst dungeon.
Yeah, but if you look at that 2-target boss as an example, it's not as annoying, but it's not at all interesting in any way, shape, or form, you know?
Yeah.
It seems like they actually try to do something with this boss, and I guess we'll see if it turns out. I guess we'll see if City of Threads turns out to be good or not, but RP in M+ or random dragged out time is never going to be a fan favorite, even if it's a good dungeon.
Yeah.
Even if it would be a good dungeon.
Yeah, I think like the bosses are pretty cool and stuff. I think it's mostly for me, it's just the RP sequence that just immediately makes it like F tier, you know? Like like completely unconditional on everything else. Like if there's a bunch of weird RP, and especially the way it's done here, that just immediately just shoots us down to F. And I hope that I'm gonna, throughout the season doing it more, whatever, I'm gonna, you know, ease up on it. But for now, I just hate it.
I think my only F tier dungeon is Arakara. And that's a shame because that seems to be the easiest dungeon as well. So if I hate the dungeon that you're probably gonna play the most, I'm not gonna play.
I don't think it's the easiest dungeon now. Or, well, it depends on which level you're at, but I think Mists is probably easier.
Okay.
And if you're looking at like a little bit lower than the very highest push, it looks like Dawnbreaker is easier than Arakara as well.
Okay.
But Dawnbreaker becomes hard, I think, on the hierarchies potentially. So we'll see about that. But yeah, I don't think that Arakara is going to be one of those like spam reset dungeon things, if that makes sense. But we'll see. It's going to be either that or Mist, I guess. Those are the only candidates anyway.
Yeah, Mist might be. I don't have like Mist is fine. I feel like it's just annoying with the maze, especially when you're the healer, right?
Yeah,
I haven't looked into the weaker solutions this expansion.
It's the same ones that you had before. There's nothing new about it.
Yeah, then I'm not gonna like it. I see BA running around and like it's not a very fun thing to do if we can sidetrack a bit on that kind of RP, because as a healer you are the one that's gonna do it. It does not matter if you have an MM hunter or someone that's completely mobile, the healer will do it. And then you're gonna run about and you're gonna outrange the tank, and you're not going to do DPS, and it becomes a very like none of the packs feels good. You also want to DPS and do your rotation and play the game, right?
Yeah.
And then playing a Preservation Evoker on top of it, where you have like next to 0 range to begin with,
Right.
it is a very feels bad situation where you're like, imagine if like what's the best thing you can do? Like you need to do the maze before you're done with the pack, otherwise you've lost time.
Yeah.
And you're not gonna want to run around if you don't have a deterministic weak card that will 100% solve it for you. You can't do it when it's just one mob there or something, like in the end.
I mean, there's a weak aura that if you solve, I think, for the first 2, then it will always tell you without you having to do anything where you go, because there's only so many paths. So I think after you've done the first 2, or maybe it is 3, I think it's 2 though, or maybe it's 3, I don't know, 2 or 3. After you've done that, then it will always know. So that you have. So you're never solving more than that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but the old weak aura I have played with in Shadowlands was something where you ticked the patterns that you had, then it just glue on the one that, like, it helped you do the thinking part.
Yeah. It's 2
You
different.
still had to go
It's
around.
2 different weak auras. So there was always one in Shadowlands as well that. I think the one actually that you're talking about is actually an add-on, not even a weak aura.
Oh yeah, probably.
But yeah, that one still exists as well. But the other thing is more like there's only, it's not random, if that makes sense, right? Because there's only a certain preset number of paths that you can take, and so the weak aura or the add-on or whatever, I think that's a weak aura, the one I'm thinking about now, that will know that if you've taken this path so far, there's only one possible solution left, so it will just tell you exactly where to go all the time. And it will show you with some sort of graphic, so it's not even related to the things. You don't have to go and look at them, if that makes sense. You just know exactly which door it is every time. It will just say. Like,
I don't think I ever played with that. Was that some sort of like Chinese server weak aura?
I think
because it rings a bell.
Yeah, I think it came from there. Yeah, but that definitely existed already in Shadowlands.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think the combination of those two things, and especially since you can also look the first 2, you can see where the thing is going, right? Just you look at where the little thing is running. So I think in the end, I think it turns out like you maybe only have to actually solve 1 or something on your own or something like that if you actually look there and then just follow the week or something. So it's not too bad, but yeah, it's weird.
It's still reason enough not to play healer, you know.
Kind of, yeah. And then there's another weird thing. This not had nothing to do with healer, but there's another very weird thing with the Mist Maze, which is that some classes can still pull through the walls.
Yeah.
Which I think they should just put down their foot there and just stop that. Because, like, so why do the mobs have to spawn before you... Couldn't all the mobs just spawn upon the wall opening, right? Wouldn't that make more sense so that you wouldn't... Just so it wouldn't be
but
possible.
they could remove the maze and make it so you can have that small delay and then you spawn the mobs or something, or the mobs pull or whatever. Like they could keep the structure of the dungeon and just change how the maze mechanic works completely and solve both of the annoying running around finding the solution part as well as the pulling through walls that only certain classes can do.
Yeah. I mean,
because it isn't, it's also healer related, but do you know how annoying it is to pull through walls? Who do you think gets high aggro on their screen when some hunter pet has pulled like 2 mazes down?
Yeah, of course it's the healer, yeah.
And then now the mobs do charges and stuff as well. So I've gotten like gimped from a situation where I couldn't outplay it. Like you just get, I don't know. It's all of this pulling through walls shit. They should have a hard stance on. I feel like it's never fun. And if it makes the dungeon better, change the dungeon instead and remove the pulling.
Yeah. Yeah, the worst part about it, I guess, is that it actually makes the dungeon better, right? Because otherwise you're forced to play pack by pack in this, which is just I don't understand why you would want to do that, I guess. But it might be that you have to on hierarchies because it's too hard to play 2 packs. I'm not sure.
Yeah. But I feel like that's the situation you end up in a lot of the times with these, not exploits, but clever use of game mechanics within dungeons, is that it actually makes a dungeon more playable or better in some way or faster. So I guess it's part of the reason that they don't fix it, because people are enjoying the way you can play the dungeon now, if you have the preferred setup or possibilities. But they really should just Like, why wouldn't they just remove the mace and make it so everyone can pull through the walls?
Yeah. Or just like if they still, wanted to keep the mace in some way but they wanted to pull through walls, just put a little lever or something that you can click and then the motes from the next one come or whatever. Just anything. Just so that you would neutralize the advantage of having specifically those classes. Because if it becomes like super meta and you have to pull through the wall, it's super awkward if only like, I don't know which classes can do it now, like Hunter and Warlock or something, right? Especially when those don't really even seem to be in the meta, it becomes even weirder.
Well, it becomes very annoying when this class that would do something very specific in a dungeon is the spot you're directly competing with. Like
Yeah.
a good example is as a healer, you're gonna have a hard time getting invites to a dungeon that needs a disease dispel. If you're the one healing spec that doesn't have the disease dispel, then you're just rarely gonna play the dungeon, and that just becomes increasingly annoying with random tech that's not even needed, but people will still want to do it in a 10 to make the key go faster.
Yeah. And I think that I think there's a little bit of a meta forming where I think Frost DK and Augevoker are kind of a good base, I think. And then you have another class on top of that, which can be a little bit
Seems to be
mixed.
Resto Shaman as well, right?
Yeah, Resto Shaman is like the most dominant, I think. For sure.
Do you think it's because of their healing, their damage, or their dispel?
I haven't played enough keys to know actually. I don't know. But I've seen that they're very dominant. They're like 50% of the top 100 or something or more.
Yeah. Yeah, I would guess that they have good numbers for 5-man, their mana is not an issue. And then they have the curse dispel with the poison cleansing totem. They come with lust, which is rarely a bad thing. But I think they just edge out Press, who seems to be the second most popular healer, if I'm correct.
I don't know.
By just the dispel situation.
But also again here, I think obviously the value of press goes down if you have AUG, right? Like the second of every class, you always whatever the first one brought.
Oh, that's true as well. Yeah.
So if AUG is actually meta, then obviously press automatically becomes much worse.
Yeah.
So it could have something to do with that as well.
That's true.
But I guess we'll see later on when the meta sort of sets more how that will affect things. But yeah, just like I think if it turns out that like it is, let's say, AUG and Frost DK and it is Resto Shaman or whatever, and then I don't know, it doesn't really matter about the tank. And then I want to come in there as like a DPS warrior, right, and have the third spot. Then, for example, maybe it becomes impossible for me to get invited to Mists because you need someone to pull through the wall. So you're always going to take that, for example. Or similar case for whatever healer situation, right, where you need the Dispeller, so we're never going to invite you. That always usually ends up happening, that some classes have a very hard time getting into specific dungeons because some specific utility is needed there that isn't provided by the direct meta setup.
Well, at least we're in a good position. I know it's not perfect, but if we look back to Shadowlands Season 3 and 4, when it was Blood DK, Hunter, Survival Hunter, and Lock being like the staple. And if Frost DK and Augmentation is going to be the corner staple of the comp, at least you have the Lust and the Res. That means that there could be some flexibility in the tank, third DPS, and healer. Like you wouldn't need the core utility.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually really nice when those are covered. So
because when you have like Shadow Priest AUG, that becomes awkward for the Fury Warrior in a meta where you want to play Resto Druid. Like you can't fit in the Lust without the Mage sort of situation.
The Augmentation has Bloodlust.
The Combat Rust without something, yeah. It was a bad example.
But your example became really bad when you introduced the Resto Druid.
Druid as well. Yeah.
But yeah.
Because often I know that's been a big issue for you. I had that issue a tiny bit when I plugged on my Mistweaver as well, where you're not really coming with one of the two mandatory, or people think are mandatory utilities.
Yeah, exactly.
And Lust is also so annoying because for certain comps, like you can see a rogue warrior comp, and I look at it and it's like this comp does not need Lust. Like it's not a big difference at all.
Yeah, I mean I pretty much played Season 4 without Lust, right? And that was fine, so.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, do you have anything else you want to bring up?
Yeah, actually. I whispered you on our heroic split that we had an incident on court.
Oh yeah, right.
And it was so random, and I vaguely heard about similar situations, but I'll explain what happened. So basically we were killing court heroic, and we pushed the boss into the last phase when one of the bosses was underground, or I'm not sure exactly what happened, but somehow we ended up with the big buggy guy standing in the middle. I think he was supposed to do the phase where he shoots up spikes and everything, like the intermission. And the spider lady was just gone. And he was just idle, and he was at like 20%. So we were talking while DPSing what are we gonna do. And we just end up killing the boss. And the boss dies. The spider lady does not appear. We can't loot the boss. We're still in raid combat. So we're standing there like, oh fuck, what do we do? Like, do we have mail? Do we leave the raid? How do we solve this? And we just ended up taking a break.
Because you were saved at this point, right? Like
Yeah, we were saved. We'd looked in the raid info and we were saved to the boss. I think. I'm pretty sure everyone said that we were saved. I hadn't looked, so I can't be 100% sure.
Right.
But we were supposedly saved. So I actually went on a break for the 12 minutes you were supposed to be on break. And then when I came back to the raid, I was in there with one pug warrior we invited because he could fill out the raid and can't loot the trinket we want, the int trinket. And then one other raider. So we're 3 people, not in a group, standing in the room. The same situation still there, like the boss is dead, we can't loot it. And they start talking in Discord, and they want us to leave the raid so they can try and reset. But the guildie is AFK, and the pug warrior can't get out. He's trying to Hearthstone, but the Dark Moon Ascension trinket, when it refreshes, it stops the cast.
Oh no.
So his trinket is putting him in perpetual. Well, he's in combat, but he can't cast a Hearthstone. So I'm trying to coach him where, like, okay, you need to wait till you get a buff, and then you need to click it off like halfway through the duration with the buff. And hopefully that refreshes the tick rate as well. And it doesn't work, and I'm standing there, and it's becoming a thing in Discord. I'm streaming, and it's a lot of fun. But then someone cooks the Dalaran Hearthstone is quicker, so we get the warrior out. So it's just me and a hunter in the raid, or a guildie that's there. He's AFK, so I'm just waiting for him to come back on the order of the guildmaster. And then out of nowhere, the spider lady spawns. And I'm 25 minutes or something into combat. And she spawns and starts chasing me. And she has no health. She has like 200k health. So I'm kiting for like 3 seconds and trying to decide, do I wipe, do I kill? Because we're not in a group anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And we're saved. So I just end up tip the scales, and I just fire breath. I one-shot her. And she dies, and I can see loot on her. So after some time, I go up to her and I loot her, and she had loot. And then everyone started going into the raid on their own, and then they got the loot pop up as well. So we ended up with getting the loot on the boss. But for some reason, she appeared after I have been. If I was 24 minutes into combat, she must have been idle for at least 20, right?
Yeah.
So I have no clue what happened.
It's just so weird that whatever happened, that it resolved after a while. Like
Yeah.
that it's self-resolved, right?
Well, I mean, we've been playing this game for so long as well, so like we know most of the interactions. But when I've killed a raid boss, that people have left the raid and left combat, left group, left everything, that they got loot or the option to roll on the loot when they enter the raid again, surprised me. Like I thought it was still fucked. Even though it is the same lockout, I wouldn't guess that they would enter this like the exact same lockout. I guess it does make sense. But it was a really weird situation, and it was sort of only solved by me coming back and not leaving the raid. I was the only one not AFK in the raid when this happened.
That is such a that is such a weird thing to happen.
So yeah, very strange. It sort of ended up okay. We lost some time, as you can imagine, on main raid.
Yeah.
But I guess all in all, it was fine. It was funny. Like we weren't really upset. It was just very strange that the boss disappeared and didn't reappear, and then like everyone intuitively left the raid so they could get ported out, but you don't get ported out when you're in raid combat. So we learned a lot that day, I think, or got reminded how things actually work, because it's not often you're just stuck in a room where you can't die.
I mean, it's especially funny with the warrior with the Darkmoon Sigil Ascension, and
Yeah.
the funny thing is also the way that trinket actually, or that embellishment is so weird, because the way that it works is that, so because of the way that it works, I think your weird thing there of trying to game it wouldn't work.
Yeah, it didn't. So
Yeah, and also because of the way that it works, it's so crazy bad in M+, because the way that it actually works is that it's not like it stacks up and then to 8 or seconds, whatever the interval. I guess it's 8 second interval. It's not that it's like if you go out of combat, for example, that it would start ticking down from 8 seconds or something or whatever. So the way that it works is that it just has like an internal 8 second thing that just keeps running all the time, both when you're outside and inside combat. And
okay.
every time that it hits, it will say like, okay, if you are in combat,
Yeah.
increment the stack count by 1, or if you're at max, then just do nothing. But if you're out of combat, then it will fully remove the buff.
Yeah.
So it means that in M+, if you play it on like a boss or something, and you have full stacks and you kill the boss, if you get unlucky and the timer is such that the 1 second after you kill the boss, the next check is, then you will just immediately, 1 second after combat, you'll just lose the stack. Fully, like all stacks.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, that's bad.
yeah, so that's why no one's going to play it
You
for
can
keys.
also lose it to like Nelf and Vanish and similar effects during not boss fights, but trash fights.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could lose it to a lot
Yeah.
of weird things like that. So
These
it's just,
timers are annoying, man. They have a similar mechanic in the monk tree where you get an instant vivify every 10 seconds, and it works the exact same thing, or in the exact same way. And for the longest time, it didn't care if you actually casted the vivify instant as well. I think they fixed that now. But you could, like, I had to have the timer on my screen all the time, because if it was 1 second from refreshing and I hard casted a vivify, it would consume the buff, since I would have the buff when it's
it will consume it on the
again.
hard-casted one.
Yeah, exactly.
Ugh.
So you got into like a really awkward and really common position where if it's half a second left on the, or like 1 second or something left on the duration until it refreshes, you're better off idling, not using any global, and just waiting for the instant,
Right. I mean,
because hard casting would be slower.
yeah. I mean, there must be some like weird, like technical reason why they think it's easier to make it like this or something, right? Because now they just have to have like a weird thing that's just spinning all the time, and they don't have to think about anything. Otherwise, they would have to like have a bunch of like checks and start up the buff and whatever. So I don't know. But it's annoying.
No, I'm a bit in my own life, in my own work, I'm a bit scared of these perpetual timers. Like, I don't think I understand them well enough to implement them myself, or like I try to avoid having a timer just go all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, for most, I guess at least in this World of Warcraft case, right? It feels like most people wouldn't even know. Most people don't know either of these two things, the Mistweaver thing or the Darkmoon Sigil Ascension. They don't know about it. They don't care about it. It doesn't matter for them. But obviously, when you start to come to the point where you're trying to min-max things in some way, right? Then these become really weird edge cases where you have to keep track of something like this, right? Which makes no sense. I mean, obviously the embellishment thing, you're just not going to play in keys, and then it's going to be whatever, and then in raid it always works. Apart from weird maybe night elf whatever things.
Yeah.
But like the monk thing, that you have to track something like that, that's 100% not intentional, right? That's so bad, and it's so annoying.
Yeah, it is very annoying, because there's 2 parts, or there was 2 parts of it. I think it's fixed now, but I can't swear on that either. But like, I think I would track it to some extent, even if it didn't work like this. But a big part of tracking it is just because you don't want to start hardcasting something that will be instant in 0.3 seconds,
Yeah.
Like otherwise, you would just track it to see if you have it or not, and make sure you use it when it's appropriate. But that really pissed me off how that worked in in both raid and keys and everything. Because I've had that ugly weak aura in the center of my screen for so long, and I've tried different iterations just to make it like I need to look at it when I need to look at it, but I don't want to see it all the time. So yeah.
No,
But
that seems super annoying. Yeah.
That court incident was my story of the week, and I think other than that, I just wanted to ask you about Kuvesa really shortly, or because I talked in the guild today, and it didn't seem like it was common knowledge, but the way the intermission works, the pie slices are completely scripted. Like they are different from intermission to intermission if we label them intermission 1, 2, and 3. 3 being the one that goes into the last night or whatever it's called, the harder rage.
Yeah.
But they move in the same way. When I looked at it, if I look at the boss, I look to my right, and intermission 1, the pie slice goes every slice once, so it just increments towards you. And in the second intermission, it jumps 2. But apparently it goes clockwise in one and counterclockwise in the other. So I thought that would be good to know, and I wanted to ask if your guild or if you had noticed that. Because to me it seems like a huge deal, because you can predict where it's going to land when you get the blazes on you.
I don't know if it's something that people have thought about, but let me ask you this. Do you guys have a hard assigned position in the intermission, or are people just YOLOing it?
Hard assigned.
Yeah, because we also have hard assigned. So, I mean, I guess those hard assigns are based on that information. I would guess. I don't know. I wasn't part of obviously making the hard assigns, but I don't know. I haven't thought about it because I haven't actually been in on the fights. I don't know. But I think I heard from like during the race itself that people were saying like that the phase was scripted, but I'm not sure actually how.
Yeah, that's how I found out, because when I was looking at Liquid progressing the fight, Max started the intermission by saying something about the pattern. I don't remember what he said, but he said something like clockwise or counterclockwise or every other or something, just to give them a heads up.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that a lot of people have forgotten or missed this, and it surely makes it a lot harder, because when I get the blaze, obviously I'm not doing it perfect. It's a messy phase, but when I get it, I look at the pie slice, and I know what the next one's gonna be, so I know where I can pre-position. So most of the time, I manage to move straight away and then plant completely still for the overwhelming majority of the duration of the buff, right?
Yeah.
While other people weren't. And that could be due to several reasons. I think melee is a lot harder as well, because you can't really stand on, like, you have more melee than you have the intersections to stand on, right?
Right.
But I thought that could be a good tip if someone's missed it, and might even be something to ask your raid leader if he's thought about communicating it. Because people might be under the impression that it's random, and that's a lot worse than the reality.
Yeah, I'm gonna check about that. But I like, I think even from my own play on the boss on heroic, it seemed pretty obvious that they're rotating around, right? Like don't like the way you played on heroic, it feels like you just run in a circle, or am I the only one doing that? Maybe.
I don't know. I think it's very different from melee to range, because you have infinitely more space in range, right? Like I've always just stood on, like the first time I pulled the boss, I placed myself on a line, like straight in between the cones or the pie slices.
Yeah.
And then depending on where it ended up, I just shifted. But then very soon I realized that you can see where it's going to end up. But then I didn't understand the difference between the phases, since the pie slices act differently in each intermission. And now playing it on Mythic, I've realized how they move. So then I know in the first intermission, I can basically only look, if the pie slice to my right is fine, then I can just stand still. But in the second intermission, I have to look one pie slice over, or if you're even smarter, I think you can look left to the other side instead, because it's just moving in a different direction. So I don't know. It didn't seem to me that people had thought about this, especially not from how people reacted, like having someone run permanently with the blaze makes me feel like maybe they haven't really, either they put themselves in a very unfortunate position, or they've just not understood that they can predict where it's going to end up.
Right. Yeah, I haven't really like thought very actively about it, but I had a very strong sense from heroic that it felt like it was rotating. I didn't know about this thing that you were saying, like they were going counterclockwise, whatever. But I had the sense of heroic that you could just run in a circle all the time, basically, if you wanted to.
But maybe it throws people off that it changes from intermission to intermission. I'm not sure how it
Yeah.
interacts in heroic, since I'm not paying as much attention in heroic. I'm basically just planting myself in the intersection and then just reacting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now with then, yeah,
Yeah,
could be worth to
I'm
look
gonna think
at.
about that tonight during our raid and to see like what's happening. So yeah, for sure.
Did you have anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm still sort of just interested if you figure out the correct way to end the podcast.